1. Hello, everyone. It's Sinead Willihan, and I'm happy to be back with you for Barbara School episode number 16. Of course, Barbara Lamb is here with me, and the topic we're going to be discussing today is people that Barbara has had in sessions who have been taken to extraterrestrial. I was going to say ET, but I feel like we say ET really casually, and people don't always know what that means. So, extraterrestrial council meetings. And so she's going to tell some of these stories about people who have experienced this. There's not a trend of it, but there's definitely a worldwide phenomenon. This is not something that only happens in North America or only happens to certain kinds of people. There are people all over the world who have experienced this exact same thing with some differences, but with lots of interesting similarities too. Wouldn't you say, Barbara?
Yes, definitely so. Well, I never had expected to run into anything like this when I got into my past life therapy work back in the 1980s, mid 1980s. But, to my surprise, some of these things came up without the person having suspected it and without my having suspected it. So one of the interesting things that has been showing up in regressions here and there is that people from Earth have sometimes been taken to what seems to be like a council meeting, a gathering in a particular place of what we consider to be extraterrestrial beings. And they very often are the only one there who is a human being. And sometimes, depending on the circumstances and the occasion, sometimes there are one or two or a few other humans there too. So the people who had these experiences had never, ever consciously been aware that they had experienced such a thing. They didn't even know that there was such a thing. So for each person, it was a total surprise. And after the first one or two of those kind of things came up in the regressions I was doing, then when it continued to happen now and then with certain people, I just welcomed it. I felt like, oh yeah, that's part of reality too, that there really are many beings out there who have meetings together and are discussing things. Among them, they are discussing problems on planet Earth and their possible relation to those problems, and that they have wanted to have a representative or two or more of humans there to represent planet Earth. Now, this is something we certainly do not hear about, do we, in our news or anywhere that I'm aware of, and yet it does on occasion happen. So the first instance of my knowing that somebody was taken to a council meeting was back in the 1980s, before I even knew for sure that there was such a thing as extraterrestrial beings, and certainly before I started getting into this part of my work. But anyway, I was doing a past life regression with somebody. I thought it was going to be a past life regression. Turned out to be a current life regression of that woman. And she was taken by unusual beings, which she had not consciously been aware of, but it came out in the regression, taken by some unusual off-planet beings. And it seemed like where she was taken to, she was put into a room. It looked like some sort of meeting room with a big table in it around which were sitting various types of beings, a whole variety of different beings. So they looked different from each other and certainly different from us humans. But she was ushered to a chair to sit at that table and be part of that meeting. She guessed that there might have been about 20 delegates to that meeting, and each one of them was a very different looking type from each other one. They were certainly what we would call extraterrestrial beings rather than human beings. So she was seated at this table, and she was aware that the group was discussing different situations on various planets, various civilizations, and then eventually they got around to discussing planet Earth, and they wanted her input from the point of view of being a human being living on planet Earth. So they were discussing some of the problems, and one of the big issues was that they were really deliberating over the fact that these other beings, must have made a mistake, must have made a genetic error in creating human beings. Now, my client had never even had that thought before, that we had been created by other beings, but they seemed to all be on board with that idea that a mixture of them had created human beings, and were very, very interested in how we were progressing.
And was she the only human at this council at the time?
What's that?
Is she the only human in this conversation? Is she the only human being? Okay,
In
so
that particular one, she was the only human that she was aware of. So that was very odd for her to be there with all these different kinds of beings, and to hear them talking about the other planets, and she hadn't even known that civilizations were living on other planets. And so this was all of great interest to her. And then a real surprise that they started discussing planet Earth and looking at her as a representative of planet Earth. So they were very concerned because they recognized that they had made a very big mistake way back when they created us humans, that included in the DNA was the quality of aggressiveness, of greed, of selfishness, of wanting to dominate, wanting power. And they recognized that not everybody on Earth had those particular qualities, but enough of them had those qualities that it really, really made a difference, that there was a lot of trouble happening on planet Earth. And so they were in a quandary, really, of wondering what they should do about that, if anything. They had made the mistake of putting those ingredients in our human DNA. And should they now do something to change that, to eliminate those qualities in our DNA? And the big issue here, the big quandary, was that they were all, these different civilizations, living by the principle of non-interference. In other words, it would seem to be okay that they created human beings, but it would not be okay to intervene, interrupt, change anything. That was a sort of universal principle that they had all agreed to. And yet, allowing these particular qualities to remain in human DNA was really causing a huge amount of problems and might even end the human race. It could escalate to that kind of an ending of the whole human race. They could see that. So that was their big issue. And they were asking my client, this woman representative from Earth, what she thought about that. Of course, she had not been prepared for that. She had not known she was going to be taken for that experience and had not really even thought before about these other beings having created humans long ago or having had any influence over our genetics. So it was quite baffling. And after the regression, she said, I just don't feel like I really was able to contribute very much, except to agree that, yes, human beings were plagued with all kinds of disastrous things going on, from one group of people to another group of people, even one individual to another, even though there was a lot of good on Earth. She recognized that the beings had given us some wonderful qualities too in creating humans, but they had made this flaw of adding the competitiveness, murderousness, greed, corruption,
Yeah.
Insisting on having your own way, the drive for power, the drive for might, all of that, which we see playing out today so much and has been playing out all through history. So it is a serious question that, as far as I know, did not get really answered in that particular meeting. But it gives an example that there are these intelligences out there in the universe, and they do get together. They are aware of planet Earth, and they are concerned with what's going on here. We're not the only ones who are concerned.
No, and thank God
There
for
are
that.
others.
Yeah, thank God for that. I mean, really, we have gotten a lot of support. And I do feel like, the evidence, I think, which is now coming out more and more as a result of whistleblowers coming forward and, congressional hearings and more people, the whole topic is just opening up.
Right.
So I think we'll get more and more evidence about this, but there is actual evidence of extraterrestrials having intervened or interfered when it comes to nuclear sites, like sites that house nuclear,
Yes.
or, and deactivating them, and that's on record. So I mean, they have intervened in ways that I feel have kept us have sort of neutralized, our aggression or our aggressive tendencies in some ways. But it is too bad that if they did create us and co-create us, if that really is true and how everything happened, it's too bad they didn't choose assertiveness over aggressiveness, right? If
Yes.
like just these slight alterations in words or slight alterations in, qualities would have made a world of difference. But then again, we've always had choice. So I don't know. It's an interesting topic to discuss.
Yes. And they did include in our DNA, they did include assertiveness. And many people have been picking up on that and emphasizing assertiveness rather than aggressiveness. So they really, as we certainly have witnessed in ourselves, they certainly added a wide variety of characteristics in us humans. But I think it's significant that some of them out there are really, really concerned. And that has come up in many indications with many other people too, the concern that many of those beings have out there for planet Earth, the Earth itself, and humanity, and what humanity is doing. And they really do not want to see the ending of the human race. and they know that it is possible that we could end our own existence with the nuclear capabilities we have, and many other ways. So I'd like to go on to another council experience. This was a different woman, and she had had lots and lots of extraterrestrial encounters. And this one was quite different in the sense that she was taken by the beings and put in a relatively small room with kind of a board room type of table in it. Excuse me.
Just to quickly ask, had she been conscious when she was meeting extraterrestrials previously, or what was the context when she had all these previous extraterrestrial visitations? What was the context of them?
She'd had many, many different types of beings coming to her, and many, many different types of experiences.
Okay.
Of a huge variety, in fact. And I did lots of regressions with her over a period of years. So we get to learn a lot about what had been happening for her. But on this particular occasion, she was taken to this smaller room. She had no idea where it was, but didn't seem to be on Earth. And there were different beings there, no other human beings. So it was sort of like a rectangular table that she was seated at, and there were other beings to her side of different types. And then right directly across the table from her were 4 beings who she described as being a beautiful shade of blue, and they were glowing with light. They were definitely not human, but they seemed so delightful, and they had a sound that emanated from them. It was a tinkling sound. So she was sitting there. The other beings were silent, but these 4 sitting right across the table from her were these beautiful blue beings, not exactly in a defined form, but glowing with light and tinkling with this beautiful sound, like the prettiest wind chimes sort of sound. And between the dazzling look of them, the light radiating out from them, the beautiful blue color, the tinkling sound, she was just mesmerized, fascinated. She loved them. And she was so distracted by the tinkling and the glowing and the lovingness of these beings that when they were discussing things in that meeting, she couldn't pay attention to it. Excuse me, just a moment. And they would ask her a question, and she said, it's just so hard to focus my mind because I'm so dazzled by these beings. She kept using that word, dazzled and dazzling. They were iridescent, they were shining, they were just radiating love. The other beings around the table were not like that. They seemed to be more physical, very serious, more somber, and they all talked telepathically, which she was able to understand. And this brings up an interesting side note that so many of the people I have regressed have been able to hear what the beings are saying, particularly when the beings are saying something to them directly, and yet they don't hear it with their ears, they hear it in their minds, which means that we must all have that ability for telepathic receiving messages, whether we have been aware of it or not. I think, frankly, that if there was a family where there were children and that the young children didn't get spoken to in words, but got spoken to from their parents, just with the parents' thoughts, that they probably would develop that ability that we all apparently have. And of course, they would have to also learn to hear with their ears, hear voices and other sounds. But it would be very interesting if there would be a family on Earth that would raise their children to pick up thoughts telepathically and be able to communicate telepathically.
Well,
Anyway,
my understanding is that the remote communities, like the very, very remote communities of indigenous people, the tribes that have had little to no contact with the outside world ever, those ones who still live in the old ancient ways in the jungle, that they have natural telepathic ability. And part of it is because in our cultures, we talk too much. We talk too much. We really do, and there's a lot of ego involved in that, right? There's a lot of like, everybody's got to say what their opinion is and everybody needs to be heard and all this stuff. And in those communities, they just don't really have that. There's a lot less talking in general and a lot more listening. And so they seem to have telepathic ability. So I agree with you. I mean, it would be absolutely fascinating if there was a modern city dwelling, perhaps family that engaged in some sort of experiment like that, where they had young children and just, if they were studied for a year to see what happened if they were 90% nonverbal, let's say, that would be really, really interesting. And I bet there'd be some surprising results. I would not be shocked at all if there was some evidence of telepathy, natural telepathy.
right. Yeah, I would not be surprised at all either. And maybe some people are experiencing that with their autistic children. Of course, there's quite a spectrum, as we know, of autism, but there may be some autistic children who can really understand people's thoughts and maybe even are doing their best to send their own thoughts, whether they're picked up by the other people or not. That's another question. But yeah, I think there may be populations among us that would have more access to that ability than other groups. Who knows? Anyway, I'll go on with the council meetings. There was a man whom I regressed a few years ago, and he was taken onto a craft and was led along, that is, floated along. He was upright, but he was floated along this large curved hallway and into a large room. And he said there were 24 beings there. And most of them were not human looking. They all seemed to be a different species, but among them there were a few other people who looked like human beings. But he was recognizing, as he was ushered to a seat at this large table, that he was apparently a delegate from planet Earth. And they too were discussing issues on other planets. There are a lot of planets that are not treating each other well. There's aggression from one planet to another. They're not all involved in that, but many of them are, just like we are involved with aggression between nations here on Earth. In that case, it's between planets, and there are some wars out there that are of real concern to these planetary gatherings. And then they, of course, were discussing planet Earth, and very similar to what that woman had experienced in her council meeting, wondering what they should do. Should they intervene? Should they try to help? And it came down to the fact that they all kind of agreed that it would be okay to stop humanity from completely blowing itself up and ruining it. And that's why it was agreed in that particular council meeting that it would be acceptable in terms of universal law. It would be acceptable for them to come to Earth and to turn off some of the missile silos, which had radioactive nuclear weapons in these missiles. And they were able to turn that off, not only in the United States, but all over the world, wherever those missiles were existing, ready to be just released and shot off at any direction. And we know, too, that this has been witnessed by a number of people here in this country. Even very high-ranking military people have testified that they have seen these unusual disc-shaped crafts hovering over some of our nuclear facilities, and they have realized that the ability to send off those missiles has been disabled. As you know, so hopefully that is truly happening all over the world, those that could be shot in our direction or any direction. So there are these councils out there that are very concerned about planet Earth and all that's going on here, and definitely want to help us to save ourselves. And yet, you know, there are certain guidelines of other kinds of interference that they have agreed they cannot do. But that one, because it could wipe us all out and even do unfathomable damage to the Earth itself, so that no life would be able to be here for a long, long time. You know, they're definitely very concerned
Yes.
about that.
I've heard over and over and read over and over again as well from multiple people who I think both of us respect, and you know, many people in the community respect, scientists, former high-ranking military researchers, whoever, who've said that that the warning has also been that if nuclear war were to happen on Earth, that it would also send out a very, very damaging reverberation through the cosmos and would affect other planets and other beings.
Yes.
So, yeah.
Yes, some of these groups have said that if we start sending off nuclear weapons and those explosions happen, that the radiation will go out through the whole solar system and beyond the solar system, affecting everybody, even all of those beings out there whom we don't even know about.
Yeah.
But they do exist, and they would be affected. And apparently there's no other planet that is sort of on the brink of being able to do that, send out that kind of weapon. I mean, they probably could have developed those kinds of weapons, but they've chosen not to because of the tremendous destructive power and influence that they have. So I'd like to talk now about a woman whom I regressed and got more details about the council meeting from her than from the other people who went to council meetings. So this woman was unaware for many, many years that she had experienced the other beings in any way at all. But she came to realize it by her husband coming and having regressions. He was highly suspecting that something of this sort, visits with the other beings, had been happening to him. And when she came for his first regression, she was sitting right there in the room. They asked my permission, and that was fine with me. And she had a big legal notepad in her lap and a pen. And I did notice during the induction, the relaxation part of the regression of her husband, that she was sitting in a chair in the room, and was almost feverishly, it seemed, drawing. And I looked over at it. She was just a few feet away from me, and I could see that what she was drawing seemed to be some sort of unusual language that I didn't recognize. She did pages and pages and pages of it while he was going down into the deep relaxation to have his regression. And then when he was in the regression, I looked over at her, and she seemed to be totally unconscious, maybe asleep. I wasn't sure what kind of unconscious state it was. Anyway, that was the occasion in which not only he found out about a very important extraterrestrial experience he had had, but she was beginning to realize that, lo and behold, she had been having extraterrestrial encounters as well, to her great surprise, to his surprise, her surprise, and my surprise. Anyway, eventually she started coming to me for regressions. And on one of these regressions, she was taken to what seemed like the inside of a very big spacecraft. She didn't really know what it was or where it was. And she was taken to a room where there were big round, she called them pods. She described them to look like the bathyspheres that we used to have that would go down deep in the ocean for exploring the oceans. So a big round metal sphere, and they opened a door and they put her in, and it was filled with liquid. And before she went in, she noticed that there was a series of 5 of those spheres lined up in a row in that room, and she was put into the middle one. So they opened a hatch, sort of semi from the top, which formed the curve of that bathysphere-looking craft. And she was sort of lifted up and put in it, and she realized that it was full of a fluid. And there was a little bit of air at the very top of the inside of the bathysphere, but the rest of it was fluid. And at first she panicked. Oh my gosh, I'm going to drown. But she realized soon that she could breathe in that liquid. It wasn't just water, it was something else, some special kind of liquid. And so here she was, just sort of floating around in this individual bathysphere. And it sort of rotated a little bit, sort of turn very, very slowly, very evenly. It was not thrown about inside in that liquid. And through the hatch near the top, she had the sense of hours of light and hours when it was darker. And she determined that she was in that bathysphere, breathing that liquid for what seemed to her to be 2.5 days, during which the larger ship she was on was probably traveling. She was guessing later when she realized all this. And then, after what she thought was 2.5 days, they opened the hatch and they took her out of the bathysphere, out of that liquid. And because she had been breathing in the liquid, she had to cough up quite a bit of it. And it just went out on the floor. And while this was happening, she noticed that a person from each of the other 4 bathyspheres were being taken out, and they too were coughing up the liquid that they had been breathing in, as she had been. And one of them was gagging and choking on what he was throwing up, coughing out of this liquid. And they just left him on the other beings who were there, extraterrestrial beings, just simply left that one on the floor as they helped the others to get dried off and get all of the liquid out. And then these beings put a robe on them, and it had a hood that came out several inches beyond their faces, so that the only way you could see the face inside was to get right in front and look directly in. You could not see what the person was like from the sides or even most angles. So each one of these 4 people remaining were dressed in a robe like this, with this big stiff hood coming out and something tying around their waist. The robes came down to the ground, and then they were all taken away from those bathyspheres. By the way, they had been dried up also with some sort of toweling, and dressed in these robes, and then led by a being in a similar robe along a very, very long, curved hallway. They walked and walked and walked, it seemed to her, and eventually they came to a fork in the hallway. She thought that they were going to go to the left, but they were guided to go to the right. And she said, "Oh, suddenly I remember doing this before and going to the left. I wonder why we're going to the right now." Anyway, the right-hand fork in the hallway took them into a gigantic room, like a huge amphitheater indoors with a ceiling. And in the huge amphitheater, there were many, many rows of tables and chairs that went all around this circular amphitheater, going up many rows from the floor on up toward the back. Oh, maybe she thought 15 or 20 rows. And she was led up a little aisle to one of the middle rows on a particular part of this amphitheater, and was ushered to sit down in a chair behind one of these big tables, looking like a big banquet type table, with a cloth coming down from the front so that people's bodies and legs would not be visible that way. So she was sitting there among a couple of other humans, the ones who would come with her, and a couple more, all sitting in the same row, the same table, looking down into the amphitheater. And nothing was happening for a while. She had plenty of time to look around, and she saw that everybody in the whole huge amphitheater, everybody had one of these robes and hoods that came way out, so you couldn't see their faces, but she felt quite sure that they were not human, that she was in the human section of that big gathering. All the others were different kinds of beings. And once in a while, leaning forward, she could get a glimpse of somebody in one of those hoods and realized, no, that's definitely not a human being. And then she looked down at the floor of this amphitheater room, and there was like a board table there, and about 3 or 4 different kinds of beings. They also had robes, but they did not have the hoods that came past their heads, so she could see what their heads looked like, and they were definitely not human beings. And then the meeting was convened, and it went on for a long time with their discussing different situations on various planets, and then eventually got around to discussing planet Earth and the aggressivity that was happening here and all the damage that was being done, all the lives being lost, and, great concern. And was saying that of all of those planets, there must have been a few hundred different planets and civilizations represented there. But of all of them, they were the most concerned about planet Earth. One of the reasons for that is because planet Earth is so rich in resources, more than any of the other planets put together. And we're more full of unique features and water and sunlight and just all these wonderful conditions for life, more than some of them have, more advantageous than some of them have on their own planets. And then that this beautiful planet that they were prizing so much was being ruined by certain factions of the beings, human beings living there. And so they too were discussing, what can be done on planet Earth. And there seemed to be a whole mixture of opinions from different groups of beings. Some were basically saying, well, just let it blow itself up. And others saying, no, if they blow themselves up, it's going to affect us all. And others were saying, no, these are special beings. We created them, so we don't want to lose them. Others were saying, well, we knew this was a great experiment, this planet Earth and the beings on it. And we've been watching all these millennia to see what they're doing with what they've got. And we're not surprised that it's come to this, that they could ruin it for everybody. They could blow it up totally with the advancements they've made in what they consider technology. So anyway, there were lots and lots of arguments, lots of different opinions by different delegates from different species, but all of this focused on planet Earth. And my client, a woman who's here doing a helpful profession in life, was more concerned than ever about planet Earth and felt so gratified that all of these different kinds of beings were concerned about us on planet Earth and what we could do to destroy it all. So another time, we did another regression, and she went back to that same situation, riding in that bathysphere type of container and being pulled out, coughing up all the fluid that she had been breathing in, the robes put on her and a couple of others, and taken through the long hallway again, the same sort of thing. And this time when she was seated in the human delegate section, looking around, she looked at 2 rows below her in the still human section. And one of those beings seemed to be taller than the other beings. And he slowly turned around and really shifted his position in a chair so he could look straight on backwards. And she recognized to her amazement, oh, that's my husband. He's a delegate to this meeting too, which he had not been aware of previously. He'd been aware by that time of many, many other extraterrestrial encounters with various types of beings, various types of things going on, but had not been aware that he too had been a delegate. And there was another part of this too, that somehow some of the attention of that large council meeting came to them individually, that some of the beings there were beings who had actually taken him and her for various extraterrestrial encounters. And they also, some of them, realized that he was very special to them as being a delegate on Earth, and that he was in the process of slowly killing himself because he was a heavy cigarette smoker. And no matter what he had read about that, the dangers of smoking, he just was too hopelessly addicted to it. So they got together, some of these beings, and influenced his wife to help to heal him of this habit of cigarette smoking. So one night, she found herself lying on their bed, a spoon fashioned right in back of him, lying on the bed, and with her arm around him, her arm, her hand resting on his chest. And she was hearing guidance in her mind from the beings who were not necessarily right there, but they were channeling to her, guiding her on how to send her energy through that hand over his lungs while he was relaxed, sleeping, I think. She was not sleeping, but she was lying there spoon fashioned, cuddled with him from behind. And so she was following the directions that she was telepathically hearing from the beings about how to send the healing energy, which they were giving her more of too, through her hand into his lungs. And she did that for quite a while, probably a couple of hours, just following directions and allowing the energy to come through, feeling it coming out of her hands, feeling it going into him while he was sleeping peacefully, not even knowing that any of this was going on. And as a result of that, when they woke up the next morning, he got up, and instead of reaching for a cigarette to smoke it, he picked up his partially opened pack of cigarettes and threw it away, and went around the house throwing away matches and any cigarette stubs he had, anything to do with smoking. And he had a couple of fresh packs that hadn't even been opened, took them outside, threw them in the outside garbage pail, and said, "Wow, I don't know what happened, but I just am totally turned off to smoking and never did smoke again."
Wow.
Wasn't that wonderful?
That's amazing.
I know. And she was so pleased that she had been directed, because it had never occurred to her before that she could have anything to do, no matter what she said, anything to do with his stopping smoking. And his doctor had a heart condition, and his doctor had reminded him many times, listen, if you don't give up smoking, you are not going to be with us very long.
Yeah.
He said, you got to do it.
Wow.
And he just wasn't able to until this process happened.
Incredible. I mean, and that's incredible on a number of levels, because smoking, even on a very, very, very basic, super ordinary human level, smoking is incredibly difficult to give up. I mean, you hear actually true. I don't think this is just urban myth, that quitting smoking is harder than quitting heroin or some hard drugs. Apparently, it's really incredibly
Yeah.
toxic stuff and incredibly addictive. So that is really something else. Wow.
Yeah. So that's in addition to their having been at these council meetings, which was our subject for today. But I thought it was really nice to add that bit of reality also. Yeah.
That's a really exceptional story. Have
Yeah.
these people ever been interviewed anywhere else? Have they ever talked about this experience anywhere else other than in your office?
No, I don't think so. Don't remember ever talking publicly or even individually to anybody about that particular happening. But that really, really, really impressed me.
No kidding.
Yeah.
Exceptional. I mean, it's not even a process that he went through. It was just boom, he was done immediately. Like something, I mean, obviously, whatever she was taught by them really didn't work for her. And Barbara, bringing this back to you again for a second, because, Barbara School really is about you and your life and, all the things that have led you to do what you do. And of course, your experiences with your clients are part of that. But have
Yeah.
you ever had any experiences yourself where you were, on a council or seeing a council or part of a meeting or anything similar to that in your own experiences?
No, I've had 4 experiences that I know about and had regressions on, and they didn't involve anything like that. But I have heard of this sort of thing from several more clients than the ones that I've been talking about today. But no, I don't think that I have had that kind of experience that I know of.
That you
And
know.
I very deliberately say that I know of because with so many people I have worked with, they might find out about 1 or 2 experiences in a regression. I mean, really get the validation, get all the details of those experiences. And then it may turn out years later that they will be in touch with me again and say, well, I kind of think one of those encounters happened again. And and if we regress to it, we find out that yes, indeed, there were many details of that extraterrestrial encounter that came out. So uh, they may have had may have had many encounters since the last one we had regressed to, but they didn't know about it. So that's why I always say that we know of, even in relation to myself. I've just had 4 that I know of, but no, they did not. Any of them involve a council meeting of any type. And yet there is a lot of that activity, I think, going on. And if we Americans can be taken for council meetings, I should certainly think that other delegates from other parts of the world, other cultures, other races, would be taken as well. I just don't happen to know about those cases, but I'm sure that they exist.
Oh, they definitely do. I mean, I've had some, in my work with Grant Cameron for a couple of years, being a research and interview assistant for him, I got to connect with some people from Japan, Romania, Italy, China, different countries. Grant was really good about that, wanting to collect, international experiences as much as possible. And
Yeah.
there's remarkably similar patterns in other countries. I mean, it doesn't really make any sense, especially when you consider that, it doesn't make sense in terms of what the maybe typical skeptic would say, which is, well, we're all connected to the internet. So of course we can all share stories and be influenced by them. But this goes way back prior to the internet. I mean, this goes
Mhm.
back hundreds and hundreds and thousands of years, these patterns
Right.
of contact that were happening at times that civilizations had no or not even civilizations at that point, early human settlements around the world who had no idea that each other even existed, and they had their
Right.
stories to tell. So yeah,
Yeah.
so much about these topics that are just absolutely fascinating, and the idea of the council is one that I personally am very interested in, because I am curious about this idea, theory, whatever you want to call it, that we have been seeded, that we were co-created by extraterrestrials. I'm curious about that. I'm curious to know more about it and what it means, if it's true, if it's not. But these sort of experiences had by people all over the world certainly support that idea, right? That we are
Yes.
so with others who are invested in our well-being and in our
Yeah.
development. Mhm.
Yeah. So I frankly think that that's a very wonderful thing, that we're not alone in all of existence, and that there are many out there who are very concerned. I know probably most of us on Earth are very, very concerned with some of the drastic things going on, and the direction that often seems to be leading in. So I think that in addition to our concern, it's gratifying to me personally to think that there are many others way out there, but who are able to have a lot of awareness of us and what's going on. And yet they're in that quandary about how much should they do. How much is interfering. Now, some of them may think that others coming here and decommissioning our nuclear weapons, nuclear missiles, is interfering. I think from our point of view, at least from mine, I can say, thank God
Yeah, ditto.
they have done that, and I hope that they will continue to do that.
Yes, me
I
too.
hope they will continue to make it impossible for nuclear weapons to be fired and set off around the world from anybody to anywhere. And to think that there are those out there who are very concerned, very aware, and have amazing abilities, to me, that is really very reassuring.
Yeah, I feel the same way. I feel the same way. I mean, I personally think, as I think you do too, that extraterrestrials are innumerable and are likely as varied in temperament and outlook as we are as human beings. So, it makes sense to me that there would be some nice ones and some not so nice ones, but I'm definitely very grateful for the nice ones, especially the
Oh,
ones,
yes.
in my limited experiences with them. They've been incredibly powerful and life-changing and positive for me on a
Yeah.
number of levels that are very profound. I know you feel the same way. I know many people
Yes.
feel similarly. And, I'm grateful that even though we do have that other narrative of this sort of the scarier what ifs about where we're going as a human race, and the scarier what ifs about what could be happening with extraterrestrials, right alongside that we have the positives, and there's a lot of evidence of those things as well. So we're living in the middle of extraordinary times, there's no doubt about it.
We are. Yes, we are.
So it's
Right.
interesting to think that there's a council that, or more than one, that is aware
Yeah.
of what's going on and are talking.
Yes, I get the sense that there are lots of different groups. And we do hear now and then about the Galactic Federation
Yes.
and the hybrid people I know who are living here on Earth and have a lot of contact with their extraterrestrial beings who gave them some of their genetics, that they keep emphasizing that we are all one, no matter which planet, I'm sorry, which planet we live on, which civilization we're in, which race we're in. that we're all one, not only all of us humans, but all of the beings in existence out there in space as well. And I think that is a really wonderful concept, a wonderful awareness. And I just wish that more humans, especially those who are all involved in competing factions and warlikeness, could realize that from one country invading or bombing another country, it's like they're really bombing themselves, but they just don't know that.
Yeah.
They don't have that perspective about things.
No, I feel the same as you. I hope that it can change. And I feel like, what you just said is it's a perfect way to end this episode, with the hope that we can all do that work as individuals to change our mindset and to realize that the us and them is an illusion and we're all in this together.
Yes, well said.
Mm.
Right.
So thank you, Barbara, as always, for your wisdom and your
It's been a pleasure.
sharing these stories.
See you next time.
Yes, see you next time, everyone. Thank you so much for being with us, for listening to what Barbara has to offer, and please keep liking, subscribing, and sharing. We're so glad to have you here, and we're looking forward to next time. Bye for now.
Bye-bye.